Okay, welcome along to our second session on modern device management, thanks to the good people at Ingram. Now, what I want to cover quickly is a few items that we sort of skipped over, I suppose, that I wasn't quite prepared for yesterday. So we talked about, firstly, Azure AD Join. We talked about device management, which is the Azure AD Join and managing down to the hardware of the operating system. And then we talked about application management. So what I want to do is just quickly go back to that before we looking at our device management in another way. So the way that we do all of our policies, hopefully, as you're aware now, is in endpoint.microsoft.com. And what we want to focus on here is the apps department down here. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to push out or deploy a Windows 32 application, and we want to push that out to our workstations. So again, just so you know, this is our Windows 10 workstation from yesterday. All right, and just to show you, so there's no tricks, I'm going to push out Adobe Acrobat Reader. So you'll see that Acrobat Reader is in fact not on that machine at this point in time. So going back to here, what I need to do firstly is I will need to go and get a copy of the install, the executable, the application, the 32-bit application that I'm looking to install. For Adobe, we can go to this distribution center here. We can, again, select the operating system. We can select the language, and then we can select the most current version and then basically download that file. So I've already done that. That's now sitting in a directory ready to go. So once we've got that, the other thing that we need to get, which I didn't have on my machine initially, was this Windows 32 prep tool. Okay, so this allows us to prep that executable from Adobe, make it ready for use in in Intune. So I'll put a link to that in the chat there, so you can go and have a look at that if you want. Just download that. And then once we've got those two, what we need to do is then go into the location where we've downloaded those. So if you have a look, you'll see here's the Acrobat Reader install, and here's this Intune Win app util. Now what I need to do is I need to package this Windows 32 application into a manner that Intune can understand. So basically, I'm not going to go into the great detail here, but you'll see basically I'm using a couple of command switches here, and I'm going to stick the result into a directory here called Adobe Intune. So just let me make sure that the version is the same. That's correct. So I'll hit enter here, and it can't find that directory that I'm going to push the compiled version to. So I'll go yes. And it's going to go out. You'll see here, it's basically packaging everything up, making it suitable for deployment with Intune. This will take, a couple of minutes, a minute or so to run. It will obviously depend on the size of the executable and the complexity, but generally you'll find it'll run through that very, very quickly. All right, so again, we're almost there. Just in time for a mouthful of coffee. All right, so if we do a directory listing here and we go to the directory that it created, have a look, we will see that there is this file here of the same name, but now has an extension Intune Win. So that indicates that it's a compiled or packaged up application. So now that we've got that, what we can do is we can go in and we can add an app distribution into our policy. So what we need to do is select what app type we want to use, and we're going to go down the bottom here and select the Windows 32 app because that's what we're working with. We select that. Now this is where it's going to ask for that package file. So let me go in and to Intune and into that subdirectory, and there's my packaged up application. Select that and go OK. Now it's going to ask me for the name of the application, and this is where again a bit of discipline around using a good naming convention is going to reap a lot of benefits. So if you do it correctly, you really should only probably have to do this once. So let's put in the correct details there. All right. and the publisher here is going to be Adobe. Version doesn't matter. The category we can put in there. We can also see if it forms displays in the company portal. Nothing else that we need to fill in there. So let's go next. So now we come to the install command. So this is basically what you would run as, for example, on the command line to get that application we downloaded, that full application onto a machine. So if we weren't using Intune, we would use a command like that at the command prompt to expand the distribution file and go and do an install. And typically, as you can see there, we've got a /quiet and also a /no reset. Now, remember here that this command line is dependent on the application that you are using. All right, so at the end of the day, you'll need to investigate how to do this silent install with the application that we're trying to blow in there. Now, the other one, which is also very important that you'll have to work out for that application, is the uninstall command. And we'll talk about why that's important, but you need to provide both the install and the uninstall capabilities. So the way to find these typically is to have a look at the application provider, do a bit of searching around the web. You'll generally find out what those two command lines are. Then we've got our install behavior. Typically, you want to do it as a system. We can do it as a user if you want, but most times you probably want to run it as a user in the background. And you can set the option here to do the app install may force a device restart. Now, remember, some applications want to do a restart to update. Be very careful applying this policy and forcing that to do a restart because that's going to reboot all those machines potentially in the middle of work. So we've got to be very careful there. But in this case, I'll leave it as it is. We can also set up the return codes here. I'm going to leave those as standard, but they can be adjusted and added to if you want. We go next. All right, so the operating system we're going to target here is a 64-bit architecture. We can select a minimum deployment operating system. In this case, I'll just make 1803 so I know it'll work. I can also specify, disk requirements, physical memory, all of those sort of stuff as well, but they are optional extras as you see. Now, the other option that we can do here is we want to make sure that we can also have any additional rules here if we want. So if you want to do something else after this install, do a profile or whatever, we've got that capability. So not only can we do the first initial install, we could go and do the second one if we wanted to. Okay. So the idea is next we want to detect, is the application already on the device? We don't want to keep reinstalling it over and over again. We want to make sure that we're not doing multiple installs. So what I'm going to do here is select to do a manually configured option here, and then I'm going to add a rule. So the rule is going to tell me, okay, how am I going to know that there is basically this has been installed? In this case, the easiest way is to just tell the rule, okay, well, if you go to this directory and you happen to see this file, so basically the Acrobat Reader exe file there, then what we want to do basically is let it know that it's already installed. All right, so again, we can also say it works for 32 and 64-bit. All right, so the folder exists and you'll see that rule appear down there. So if we detect the software already on the device, we don't want to take any action. We don't want to force the deployment. We can also put in any dependencies. So has it got this version? Has it got .NET 5.5 or 5.56 or whatever? We can do all that sort of stuff if we want to. We can also supersede that. You'll notice supersede the app if it's sort of an upgrade. Remember, that's currently in preview, so I'm not going to change any of that. Now, here is the key to it. So what I'm going to do is you'll see I've got three options here. I've got required, available for enrolled devices, so that's an optional install, and I've got uninstall, which we'll come to. So what I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to force it to install on my devices, which I have put in a group here, which we talked about yesterday. So I will put those in a group. So you'll see now that this will be pushed out onto any matching device in that group. It will be pushed out as soon as possible. And you'll see that we have a number of additional options here that we can configure. At this stage, we've configured the download from the vendor, put in the install, uninstall, set up the rules to make sure it's not there, and now we're targeting a group of our users and machines. So I'm going to go next. All right, review and create, that looks good. Now you'll see what's happening is it will save the policy here. All right, and you'll see now it will basically start uploading that .intune win file up into Intune, right? So again, that will vary on obviously your bandwidth, how big the file is and all that. So we'll need to wait for that to complete before we can go on, because that's the file that's going to be pushed down to our Windows 10 devices there. So we just need to give it a minute or two. Let me have a look at the queues, question in the queues. So MSIs are supported. Do we need to do this every time there is a new update? Well, it depends on the vendor, okay? So again, my advice to you is that you should only have to install Adobe once and then it auto updates from there. But again, all of those questions are dependent on the third-party software that you want to push out to it. So it's not an Intune capability, it's up to the application. Intune isn't something that does patch management. Intune does software deployment and configuration of devices, all right? So generally my advice to you would be is push out the application and set it to auto update and you shouldn't have any problems. All right, so that has installed there. You'll see how that now has finished. If we go back to our item here, you'll see here is our Adobe Acrobat Reader. If we did want to go in and edit it, go into properties here. And we can go in and change any of the options that we've selected. So again, it's just like any other policy that we have already deployed. Okay, with that, let us go to our device. All right, so what's going to happen here is that this device will poll and we'll pick up that policy and we'll then obviously deploy it. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hurry it along, hopefully be able to show you this working in action. Remember, this is a VM, so everything is a little bit slower. So if I want to force it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the connection here, go into info, all right, and go down to the sync button. So I'm going to push the sync button to force that to sync the policy as quickly as properly. The other thing that I'm going to do to make this run hopefully a little bit quicker is I'm going to go in here and run stop and restart a Microsoft service here. Okay, so let me go in here and paste this. So there is an Intune management service which is installed the first time you put it on a device here. So all I'm going to do is stop and restart that. And that will hopefully, again, start polling immediately. So if I now go right mouse click and go to Task Manager, and let us, again, keep our fingers crossed that this won't take too long to happen. So what we should see in a moment is, hopefully, is that Acrobat installer should commence in the background. We won't see anything because we did a quiet install, remember, and then eventually the only indication the user would have is an icon would appear on the desktop and Adobe Acrobat would be available to them. So again, give it a moment or two, fingers crossed. Let's hope it doesn't take too long. Let me have a look at the questions. If we used an exe, then why did we package the file? The reason is that we're packaging the file because we're using Intune as a distribution method, right? So the idea here is it's got to package information about, you know, putting it in this software distribution capability. So you see here that we've now got notification that the software distribution from Intune has detected that it needs to install something. We can, again, turn that on and turn that off. So that's a good sign that things are about to happen. Can you please paste that service you restarted into the chat? Basically, it's just the Intune extension. All right, so hopefully, it won't take too long for that. Again, everything, unfortunately, in virtual machines is never immediate, but as you see, we did get that notification here that it was about to commence here. So, right, so the distribution is about to start. So let's clear all those notifications so that we see it. Fingers crossed, come on. And then, like I said, it should, in a second or two, basically see that Adobe jump in there and start to execute. It's never going to happen when you want it, is it? So let's see. What else we got? Any other questions? No, it'd be good that things to start. If you're happy enough to believe me, then I'm happy to. I'll continue on and come back, but it would be nice if it worked, so you would believe me. Come on. Again, a lot of the delays here is because we have a virtual machine which is hosted on a Hyper-V machine, which is sitting in Azure. So all of that tends to slow down the actual machines here. They haven't got a huge amount of RAM or capacity. Come on. All right, so I think that if we don't see anything pop up shortly, we might have to move it along. So there was a request to have a look at that page again. So if we have a look at the Adobe Acrobat Reader, I'm not sure basically what you're looking for there, but if you go into properties, you can go in and edit any of the lines there. And the major one here around the program is this one. So this is the install command, the silent install command, and the uninstall command here. All right, and you'll see that it is running in the behavior of the system context if you want. So we can also run in the user context, but it's going to, in this case, run in the system context. All right, well, looks as though I haven't done enough sacrifice to the demo gods. It hasn't basically run. No, so again, at the end of the day, it just installs based on the commands that were in this command line, right? So it's just all Intune's going to do is basically deploy the software, and then it's going to run this command which you've specified. If you didn't specify quiet, then it won't do a quiet install. This is, again, remember, the way that this works is the deployment is how it actually installs is determined by the application and the command line you use. It's not determined by Intune. So that it's very dependent on this line and also on that line, and you need to make sure that you do get those correct. All right, well, for whatever reason, let me have a look. I don't think it will have installed it. I would have seen it. Acrobat, no, not yet. Okay, that's what I thought. Hang on, we're going to 100% CPU. Let's see. I'll give it another 60 seconds. If it hasn't done it, then we will move on. All right, well, we'll come back and have a look at this, and all you'll see then basically is hopefully an icon, a PDF icon on the desktop there. Okay, so at the end of the day, like I said, it is a big file, unfortunately, for Adobe. So it's not. It might take a minute to get onto this VM and install it and create disk space and whatever. Okay, so our management service again has now kicked off. All right, so we got that warning. So this is now executing. You might just be seeing this happening now. So that's obviously the Intune service that's going to preempt the actual installation of the application itself. All right, so here we go. We've got another message here. Let us see what happens. We have the management service doing something. As you said, it could be the fact that it was a large install coming down, and I'm just not patient enough. Come on. So yeah, there it is running. Come on. So it's obviously is running the Intune service. All right. Okay, so someone said that it failed. Let's have a look. Okay, so the installation has failed for some reason. All right, but again, the idea would be, if everything was right, the idea would be is that it should install. I did a video this morning on this, and I'm happy to show you. I can give you the link to that later. And it did actually install on this machine, so maybe I need to do something else on this that I have overlooked. So I do apologize for that. Now, what we've done there is we've done the install of the application, and we're forced it to do an install. Now, what we can do is once that application is in there, and if we scroll down the bottom here, you'll see that you've also got the capability here down the bottom to set it to uninstall. All right, so when it hopefully installs successfully, and it doesn't appear it did, I apologize for that. What we can do is we can remove the user or the groups from here, and then we can put them into this group down here. Now, when we put them into this group, then it is going to uninstall them. All right, so the idea here is that we can use it to install, to force an install, to have an optional ability so the user can choose whether to install it or not, or we can go in here and force an uninstall. So it's quite powerful in the way it can achieve this. And again, remember, we targeted in this case a Win32 app, but it could be just as easy to target, any of the other options that we do have here. So there are lots of options, and that's basically how we would use it as a deployment method. So the machine would spin up, you would join it to Azure AD. It would then go through the compliance policies, the configuration policies, and then when it got to any application policies, it would then basically look to install that software on there, and that's how we would get a consistent machine without basically putting our hands on it. All right, so let me see. Okay, so yeah, it looks as though it's failed. I'll need to troubleshoot that, so apologies that that demo didn't go as expected. I'll give you a link to the videos where I did do it this morning to verify that was the case. All right, are there any questions on that before I quickly go in and show you something else? Any other questions on that? You'll get the idea. And that is a bit of a finicky thing, as with all application deployments. They all are somewhat finicky to an extent. So again, it means a bit of, I suppose, getting used to playing around. Like I said, I've uninstalled and reinstalled a couple of times on this. So again, we'll check back and hopefully it fixes itself. What log files to look for? Okay, I'll show you those later on when we do the troubleshooting, so we can dig into that later when we do troubleshooting. Where's the share? Here we go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my Mini. Okay, so good, you can see that, great. Okay, so what we've got here is this device here is my personal device, and you can see that I've got, my Netflix and those sort of things on here, and I've also got my corporate applications over here. Now, if I go to a corporate application, that's OneDrive. Let me find one maybe that hasn't been opened in a while. Let's have a look at Edge. Edge looks good. We'll come back to that, but let me just show you while I'm here. So I will copy something from this corporate app. I've already logged into those. Let me try maybe Excel. What's Excel want me to do? Sign in. No, that one's been to sign in. I haven't signed into that. Let's try Whiteboard. Trying to show you. No, that wants to do the. Let's see what happens here. Because what I've done is I've set up an application management. What's happened here? That it should ask me for a no. All right, so I must have logged into these. So that's unfortunate. Let me try Word as the last option. But what it should do is it should ask me for basically a PIN number. So I've got MAM on this, which means that it's protecting the corporate applications, and that would mean the way I've set up the policy here is that it should force a PIN request for me. Let's have a look here. Now while using the app, allow, get started. Wants me to sign in. Can I sign in here? Let's have a look. Okay, so there's an example of passwordless login. So I need to match the number on my phone, hopefully, to the number that is on the screen. Hopefully I've been able to do that successfully. 2FA in action, live in action, 2FA. All right, so let's hopefully that lets me in. Okay, goes through that, and hopefully. All right, so it's not doing what I thought, but basically it should ask me a PIN number. So what I've done is, let me show you where I've gone in, and I've copied this from a corporate app. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is, hopefully this works. I'm not having much luck with demos today. Let me go into my notes. So this is a consumer app. This is just the, the Apple Notes, again, not managed by my organization. If I go and paste in there, again, it's not playing game. It's not playing. Well, that's annoying. Okay, well, I'll see if I can get that working. Don't know what's happened there. Not a good day. All right, we haven't started off well today. Luckily, it's Friday, so we can write it off to a Friday. So apologies for that. All those demos that I worked hard to make sure were working before you came obviously have failed. So I have done something wrong. I've annoyed the gods, it would seem. So I'll see if I can get those working in the break to show you what's going on there, give you a better idea. They normally do work. I don't know what I've done at the moment to not make them work, but let us try and fix this by moving along onto something a bit more interesting. All right, so let us do a bit of a summary from yesterday, and we'll look at it again in a different way than we did yesterday. So let me make sure we're in the right place, and God forbid that my pen here doesn't work. So let's go and make sure that works. Oh, look at that. Whew, finally. Okay, so let's hope that all that works now. So let's do a review of all the stuff we talked about yesterday with all the policies, but let's approach it in a flow diagram. So what I'm going to have here, I'm going to have iOS, I'm going to have Android, I'm going to have my Win 10, I'm going to have my Mac machines, right? So all of these are basically going to be considered to be a device. All right, so what we want to do is we want to manage a device, okay? And the first thing that we need to do in this process, make that a little bit smaller. The first thing we need to do in this process is we need to make a decision about whether that device is going to be corporate owned, right? Owned by the business or managed totally by the business, or it's going to be a BYOD. All right, so we need to decide where's it going to fall here, because it's going to go through a different enrollment process. Now, if we focus on the corporate side for the moment, so the first thing we're going to have to do with our corporate devices is we're going to have to do an Azure AD join. All right, so that was what I showed you yesterday with the Windows 10 machine. And we went in, we logged in, put in the details, and it appeared in the devices list. We have to go through something similar for iOS, Android, Mac, and so on. So we're doing an Azure AD join. Now, as someone mentioned yesterday, it is also possible, if you so choose, after you do an Azure AD join, to do what's called a hybrid, right, Azure AD join. Now, when we do a hybrid Azure AD join, what we're facilitating is the connection to an on-prem domain controller with an on-prem Active Directory. So what that means is that you'll get some of your policies from here, okay, and some of your policies from here. So these are going to be your group policy, and these ones are going to be, Intune and, Endpoint Manager policies. All right, now remember that the identity is going to come from two places as well. So basically the identity is going to come from AD here, as well as it's going to come from Azure AD. So this is where it can get a bit confusing when you do a hybrid join. So if you can avoid it, I certainly would recommend that you look at keeping it as simple as possible. Now, once we've done that, we basically come to the point where we have a corporate join device. If you don't need to do Azure AD join, just straight down to a corporate device. Okay. And on the other side of the scale here, because BYOD doesn't go through any of that, it will basically fall into the spectrum and still be considered BYOD. Okay. So our BYOD, remember, has no join, has no device management largely. All right. Now, once we get to that point of defining it, once again, let's focus on the corporate device. What's going to happen with the corporate device is it's going to need to go through the stage of MDM. So it's going to have to go through mobile device management. Okay, so we're going to have to set up all those policies that we talked about yesterday, which are going to manage the device down to the sort of operating system level. So if we move over to the side here, so let's go over here and keep it nice and tidy and just give us a header here. So now we're going to do the MDM process that we basically talked about. Okay, so there's a question there about if policy overlap, who takes the precedence? That's very, very hard to determine because some of the policies will vary on how long they take to apply and which have different priorities. Like I said, I'm no expert on Azure AD hybrid join. I steer away from it as much as possible because it introduces all sorts of complications. So my advice to you is if you are going to do Azure, if you are going to do a hybrid join, separate your policies so there's no potential conflict. So your group policy will target, BitLocker, and your Azure AD will target the firewall. All right, don't mix them up. So it's very hard to say which has a priority because they just get pushed down from either the local domain controller or the cloud. That could happen in different timeframes, as we saw when we did that initial demo there. All right, so it's not an easy question to answer. So my advice to you is to always avoid hybrid Azure AD join as much as you can. All right, so again, now we've got our MDM. Now, as we talked about yesterday, there are going to need to be different MDM policies for iOS, Android, Windows 10, Mac, and so on. Right, so all of that I'm going to talk about here, you would need to probably largely replicate for each different operating system. So each operating system will have its own MDM style process to go through. So the very first thing that I would recommend you think about implementing that we talked about yesterday was the Intune compliance policy. All right, so that was basically determining whether the device has the latest operating system, whether it has been, jailbroken. So this Intune compliance policy is going to take inputs from, is it jailbroken? Has it got BitLocker on there? If it's a Windows 10, what's the version of the OS? Right, and it's going to take all those inputs into that to determine whether the device is compliant. So that should be really, where's something we can do here? So that really should be the very first thing you think about implementing inside your environment there. Think about an Intune compliance policy, because that is going to help you determine effectively whether the device is suitable for the corporate information. Now, at this point, after you apply a compliance policy, we need to break this up to think about, firstly, iOS, Android devices. So think, basically here, I'm going to call them mobile, but think of those, mobile phone style devices. Versus over here, we're going to think of Windows 10 and Mac to an extent, okay, but think of these as desktop, right? So over here, we're going to sort of split this up, and you'll see why in a minute. All right, so after our Intune compliance policy, the next thing we want to do is focus on this arm here on our Windows 10 and our desktop. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to apply potentially, or we can, 3 different policies. Right, so we've got our security, we've got our edge, Edge, and we also have our Defender. All right, so can anybody from yesterday remember what these three policies are? Remember, they're typically Windows 10 policies. Can anybody remember what these policies are called? Just type it in the chat. You can remember what these three policies were from yesterday. Yes, that is correct. These are known as baseline policies. Right, now those, as we see, so if we go back to there's our machine here. All right, so what I've done here is we've gone in, we've done our Azure AD registration. The devices have appeared in our Intune. We've assumed that has been the case, so the devices have appeared in here. The next thing we've done is gone in and configured a compliance policy, right? So remember, first thing we would have done is gone in here and selected a platform. Let's just keep it simple, keep it Windows 10. Okay, and then I would have gone in and say, right, for the device to be considered compliant, Windows compliance, for that to be considered to be compliant, it's going to have these settings here. All right, so I would go in here and make those configuration settings, and that would then simply mark the device, okay, as being compliant or not, right? So I'll just set, probably can't set that. What else have I got here just to keep it simple? Oh, that's right. Firewall, so we'll set these and go next. And we've got the actions we talked about. So remember, see, the only action it does by default here is to mark the device as non-compliant. It takes no action to make any changes. It's just marking it saying it is not compliant. We go next. We add our groups. So who is this compliance policy going to apply to? We can apply it to a different set of users if we want. Normally you would apply it to everybody. I will apply it to that organization there, go create. So we've now created a compliance policy that will be pushed out to the device. Now the next step, as I've just mentioned, is you go into Endpoint Security and you go to the security baselines here. So this is where you will see the security baseline for Windows 10, the Defender baseline for Endpoint, and the Edge baseline as well. So what we would do again is we would go in here and we would create a new profile for our Windows 10 devices. So Windows, so let's just call this Win 10 baseline. And I do want to do that. And then what I would do is I would then either accept all the options here or make any adjustments that make sense, right? So, and then I would again go through the process of applying that to a group of users, all right, and devices. I'm not going to, and then that will then apply that policy. So I would repeat that process for my Windows 10 security, the baseline for Edge as well, and then the Defender for Endpoint. So that's basically the stage that I've got up to here. Now it's important to remember one of the big differences here with baselines is that these have, right, defaults set. Okay. All the other policies, so if you have a look at the Intune compliance policy up here, right, they will have no defaults. You have to go in and set up and add the defaults that you want. Okay, that's very different from baselines, and that's the reason they're called baselines is because they're automatically going to apply a number of standard defaults to your environment, and that's why I do like them, because you don't have to think about it. You don't have to drill on each one. You just apply it and you will get effectively best practices out of the box from there. What I will do is I will pause and just see if anybody has any questions on what we've covered so far. Any questions on compliance policies or the baselines? Remember, the baselines typically are going to apply just to our Windows 10 machines at this point. Are there any questions on any of that? Just give us a thumbs up. Good to go. I'm happy to continue on. don't see any reactions. Oh, there we go. Looks as though I've got one. All right. Oh, question. Okay. So looks as though he's put his hand down. Have you? Oh, Jason picked the wrong reaction button. You put your hand in the air. Yep. Okay. Good. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. I will continue on. So once we've done the baselines, and again, they're optional. We don't have to put in the compliance policy. We don't have to put in the baselines if we don't want. The next option I would suggest you want to consider is the standard endpoint policies. Okay, so these policies, endpoint policy. So these policies are things like BitLocker, antivirus, ASR, and so on. Okay, so if we go back out to our console here, those policies are here. So these are these endpoint security dedicated policies. All right, so they would need to be configured to suit your needs. So if I go in here and create an AV policy and select for Windows 10, I will select a firewall rule here, go create. So that's going to be Win10 firewall, and then I would go in and set the individual options that I want. Now, again, note, because this is an individual property, none of these options are enabled by default. So anything except the baselines are going to require you to go in and set the configuration here to suit your particular needs. All right, so once I've set those particular needs, I again would target that at a group or devices if I wanted to, and then that would apply. So in this case, if I have chosen, all right, what will have applied to my devices, right? So the first thing that would have applied is the Intune policy up the top here. Then the next thing that would have applied would have been the security baseline, then the edge, then the defender, and then any of, these in here that I've, determined that I want to apply. Okay, now remember, they're all optional. You don't have to put them all in at the same time. You can build them up, you can add them later, but in theory, we're sort of at the fifth layer here of our, of our policy. Now, the final option here, after you've done all of that, the final one down here is going to be, okay, let's move this up a little bit, is going to be our Intune, right, configuration policies. Okay, now our other devices up here, our iOS and Android devices, they don't have the option as yet for baselines or endpoint policies, so they will simply fall straight through to setting up any Intune configuration policies. Now, we found the Intune configuration policies. All right, so this was endpoint security. We went into devices. We then went into our configuration profiles there, and that's where we went in and selected to add that profile. So again, we would select Windows 10. We can choose from a number of templates, right? So things like device restrictions, domain join, all that sort of stuff is in there. Or the newer approach is to use the settings catalog and pick from a range of options. Here, Win10 device restrictions, and we can then go through and just select from a catalog there rather than going in and putting them inside each and every template. So for example, if I wanted to enable DMA guard, I would select that, and again, that would then be presented. I can then go in here and simply go next, again apply that to a group, and that would then allow me to apply to whatever I selected. Okay. So the idea here is once we get down to these Intune compliance policies, there are potentially many policies and settings that you can apply here. And that's why the advice is, again, keep it simple. And generally, if you've done the policies up here, especially for your Windows 10 devices, then really there's probably not a huge need to be doing Windows 10 policies down here. You may need to, but generally there probably isn't the need to do it. Generally, I would suggest think of the Intune configuration policies more to suit the iOS and Android side of the house. Okay, so generally these ones here, these baselines and the endpoint policies are going to be targeted more at your Windows 10 devices, whereas your Intune configuration policies are largely for iOS and Android. Now, is that always the case? No, you can mix and match as you see fit, and the settings and whatnot. But my advice to you is, again, less policies, easier to troubleshoot, and a more logical approach. All right. So again, in summary, before we take our scheduled break here, is just a quick summary is we've taken a device, we've determined whether it's BYOD or corporate. If it's a corporate device, we've joined it to Azure AD, done a hybrid Azure AD join if we needed to. We've then gone through the MDM process. The recommended MDM process would be compliance policy first, then baselines and endpoint policies for your Windows 10 desktop Mac style machines, and then your Intune configuration policies, probably more for iOS and Android. Then at that point, you then have corporate devices which are now MDM controlled, and you can manage those down to the operating system. All right, so the idea then is that once we've done the the MDM, too many M's, M&M's, too many M's. So the idea then is once we've done the MDM, we are now in a state where we can do the MAM. So we've done the MDM for our devices. They can go on and do MDM. Our BYOD was not going to be MDM, so it now forces into the application control, and we would then continue on doing the policies for MAM down here. But before we get on to that, it's probably time to bring up the clock here and ask if there are any questions before we look at taking a 10-minute break. Are there any questions from anybody? If they're not, just give me a thumbs up. Good to go. We'll push the clock and we'll come back in 10 minutes. So if there are any questions, you can come off mute. Happy to answer those directly. Otherwise, just type them into the chat there, and we can then talk about that here and now. If there's not, I don't see anything coming through the queue. So why don't we kick off our 10-minute break, stop the recording, and I will see you